Mexico, in this land of the corn tortilla, bread can often be overlooked. At least that's the viewpoint of Elena Reygadas. And one of her missions has been to elevate the way the residents and restaurants in Mexico City look at the art of bread baking. So do you have a memory of bread that made you think, I want to be a baker when you were younger?
I have many memories of going to the panaderia to pick the bread and to choose the bread. And coming to this place, having your tray and just, picking.
Well, and there's such a variety of shapes and sizes in a Mexican bakery.
Shapes, sizes, and names. The names are just beautiful, like of this kind of Mexican sweet bread. Mm-hmm. But then I remember tasting this more elaborate or more delicate or more artisanal bread and just being, wow, how can they do these flakes and how can this taste so good? And at that point I thought, I want to be a baker.
So which came first for you, the bakery or the restaurant?
Here,
yes.
The restaurant with the bakery. They were together. I don't want only a bakery, I want a restaurant but with great bread. Because I always thought you can find good bread, but it's really difficult to find good bread in a restaurant. And then I realized people want bread. I'm not the only one that loves eating bread all day.
Do you struggle with that, or does Mexico struggle with that? Because Mexico is clearly the land of corn.
Yes.
And so there's all these beautiful tortillas being made every day by people all over the Republic.
Yes.
And so you are making this beautiful bread,
mm-hmm.
which has deep roots here too. It's not brand new or anything like that.
Of course.
Does bread represent the conquistadores and the tortillas, the food of the people, or have they learned to love each other and coexist?
I'm happy you got into this because for me, I believe they coexist. The tortilla goes with food, and bread maybe it's more like a treat, more like a dessert, and the tortilla is more like fuel in a way. But I think now we have another Mexico.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful to see how things grow in this land. I think we are really, really, really fortunate.
When I saw the rhubarb at Central de Abastos, and I thought this rhubarb is prettier than the rhubarb that we're getting right now in our restaurant. We think of Chicago, where I live, as being, the perfect place for growing rhubarb. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't as beautiful as the stuff that can come year-round from Xochimilco. And I wondered when I saw that, maybe rhubarb has found its home here. And when you think those things, it makes you question if sometimes we're not misguided. And we should just open our arms up to everything and say, let's just see what happens. Let's invite it all in and see what happens.
Sometimes you have an idea of where things are from, and then it's not. And then doesn't really matter, I think, if they make a sense to have them at your table.
That's right. Elena's passion for baking is reflected in the amazing treats that she creates at her panaderia, just down the block from her restaurant Rosetta. I am wild about the delicious conchas she makes there. When I think about Mexican breakfast breads, the first thing that always comes to my mind is the concha, because it's really iconic. Streusel-topped, kind of rich bread. And when I tasted yours, and I thought, I gotta see how those are made. So can you just step us through that whole process? Because I want to learn myself.
Of course, I'm happy to do it. I think it's a matter of patience, but what we do, and I think that's the secret in a way, it's that we do this dough one day before we cook the conchas.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
Now explain what's in the dough.
So this dough, it's very close to a brioche dough.
So it's rich with eggs and butter.
Exactly.
That's why I like it.
Exactly.
I'm sure that's why I like it.
Exactly. And then, we do 80 grams conchas. Mm-hmm. In the bakery, always the same size, but anyway. And then we just give it a pre-shape.
Okay, cut me one and
yes.
I will
Now
try
it's a little
that.
bit hot. So
like that.
Exactly.
and then it...
Exactly, perfect. And then you get the cover.
So what is in this mixture?
Well, actually, before this, we put a little bit of eggs
Okay.
on top, just like to make like a seal.
So this is just beaten egg?
Just beaten egg with a little bit of milk. So after this, we have the vanilla one, that what we do is put actually the vanilla beans. And then there's butter, sugar, icing sugar,
Okay.
and vegetable.
Oh, like vegetable shortening.
Exactly.
Vegetable shortening.
It's vegetable shortening. So we do like a tortilla kind of thing.
Uh-huh. So it should come down to cover most of it, is that correct?
Yes, even a little bit more. You want to do one?
Yes.
And this one is just with cocoa.
So it's the same basic ingredients, and then you just add the cocoa powder to that, is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay. So just lay it down on top. Shall I lay it on one of these over
Yes.
here? Now what's the next?
What's the next?
I think it involves this thing, right? 'Cause
Exactly.
I'm looking at that and seeing that it's the shell shape, the concha shape.
The concha shape,
like
exactly.
That. And then this one's just a straight cutter on that side.
This is a beautiful one
Right,
for me.
right.
So this you just really go like this. Here
Oh,
we
beautiful.
go.
That's beautiful. Nice.
And then you can always also use this
Uh-huh.
like a crisp.
Oh, I see. Sure, sure.
But of course the concha one is the classic staple one. So
Nice.
after this, we just wait maybe 15 minutes.
You want it to be about double in size? Is
Double
that-
in size.
That
Exactly.
common thing?
Exactly.
And then you bake them in just a moderate oven?
Yes, 180
180, so we would say like 375 or so in,
Exactly.
in Fahrenheit.
for 12
Oh,
minutes.
not very many minutes.
No, no, no.
It bakes really fast.
Really fast.
Wow, very
Really
cool.
fast.
There's the beauty.
There's the concha.
It looks gorgeous. It looks like there's more sugar on the top of it there.
Yes, I like to sprinkle loads of sugar before it goes to the oven.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
No.
That's
You're
just like
gonna let me
that's like a personal
tear it
thing,
open.
of course. It's very
Rich
similar
is-
to brioche, a little bit less rich than brioche, but
Oh man. That is such a wonderfully memorable flavor.
and what I like is to taste also like the cocoa, like real cocoa on top. You don't want the sugary thing.
Now, I ask you to have another one of my favorite breads. And this is one I fell in love with also in street markets, and that's pan de pulque. First of all, we have pulque here.
Yes.
And pulque is the fermented sap of an agave, of a maguey. Do you mind if I taste some of this one?
I love
It's
pulque.
super sour smelling.
It's sour, but it's sweet. You can taste what fermentation tastes like. For me,
Beery. It tastes
beery, yogurty.
Yogurt. It's all of those kinds of things. But
Yes.
it's still alive.
Of
it's
course.
it's fermenting still.
Yes.
So you're using that as kind of the fermentation starter, like the yeast, if you will,
Exactly.
for this kind of bread.
That's what we do.
So how do you approach this bread? How do you make it?
Well, in a way, it's really similar to the concha dough. It's also a kind of brioche in the way that it has eggs, it has sugar, but instead of butter, it has lard,
Oh, pork lard.
pork lard. And of course, instead of water, we put the pulque. The pulque makes the bread sweet, also very moist.
Very moist.
This bread can hold moist a couple of days.
Oh,
So
nice.
that's also really good.
Really delicious bread. I want to make it into a sandwich. I don't know about you, but or toast it and spread some jam on it.
That's what I like of this bread, that it's very versatile. You can either put some beans in there and maybe some queso fresco, and I think beans and this is amazing. Or you can do with honey, and it's also amazing. So I think it's this very versatile bread that it's very typical of the pueblos of Mexico.
That's really great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
A lot of people really love conchas, those little streusel-topped breakfast buns that, well, they're everywhere in Mexico. Maybe you had them when you visited there. If you're going to take the time and invest the effort to make them at home, well, I like to start with a good buttery base dough. So I'm going to show you how to make that. It starts like most doughs by proofing yeast. And for this particular one, we're going to measure milk and warm it. Need 1/3 of a cup there. And then put it over the heat, swirling it. It'll just take a few seconds for it to get to about 110 degrees, a little bit warmer than body temperature. Pour it back into the measuring cup. Add the active dry yeast to that. A little bit of sugar goes in. Stir that and let it sit until it becomes foamy. Yeast is very foamy now. I'm going to pour that into the stand mixer. I'm going to first start by adding 3 eggs to this mixture. Turn on the mixer and just let this combine. When the eggs and that foamy yeast mixture are thoroughly combined, start adding the dry ingredients. Very slowly, add 1.5 cups of bread flour. Bread flour will give great structure to your conchas. And then add a cup of all-purpose flour. We need a tablespoon of sugar and 2 scant teaspoons of salt. And then keep the mixer going on a sort of slowish speed until the dough looks like dough and is kind of elastic and smooth. Now the last part of this is to incorporate the butter. And you need your butter, and it's got to be good quality butter, at room temperature and cut into small pieces. Now add them a little at a time, making sure that the last bits of butter have been completely incorporated before you add the next addition. So for letting it rise, you have 2 choices here. One is to put it in the refrigerator covered with plastic and let it rise overnight. The second, if you're a little bit in a hurry, is to cover it with a kitchen towel and put it in a warm part of your kitchen. Let it rise until double in bulk. That should take anywhere from an hour to 2 hours or so. Now, when it gets to double in bulk, you're still going to need to cover it with plastic and put it in the refrigerator for an hour or so just to firm it up so it'll be handleable to form into those beautiful little conchas. To make the streusel topping for the conchas, it's a very simple mixture. But again, it starts with butter, and butter at room temperature just so that it can be incorporated very easily into sugar, flour, and then we're going to give it a little bit of cinnamon, 1/2 cup of sugar. And then I'm going to put the mixer on and beat them together until they're thoroughly incorporated. Now with the mixer on its lowest speed, I'm going to add a cup of flour to that. You have to add the flour slowly so that it'll all be incorporated. And then the last thing that goes in is a little bit of ground cinnamon. I'm using the Mexican cinnamon here, the one that's called canela. And I'm going to put a tablespoon of that in. Now that everything is thoroughly incorporated, I'm going to put it into a small bowl here. If your kitchen is quite warm, this will probably need to go into the refrigerator to firm up so that you can easily form it and then lay it on the top of your conchas. Double in bulk, refrigerated for an hour just to firm it up so that it won't feel oily. And I'll say that at any moment during this process, if your dough starts to feel a little bit oily, then just put it in the refrigerator for a few minutes and firm it up again, and then just continue on with it. A little bit of flour on my board just so it won't stick to it, because my next step here is to divide the dough into 9 even pieces. Now I'm going to start to roll these and form these. Very small amount of flour because I want the dough to stick slightly to the surface. And you'll see it'll stand up beautifully. And one by one, I'm going to roll these guys. Now let them rise till double in bulk, and that should take about an hour, of course, depending on the temperature of your kitchen. And then we'll be ready to put that streusel topping on and bake them. After the dough is risen again, I brush each bun with a little beaten egg. Now my trick for flattening the cinnamon streusel topping is to use a tortilla press. I grab a walnut-sized piece of streusel topping and I press it between two sheets of plastic. Then I layer that thin tortilla-shaped streusel over each concha. Instead of using a specialty cutter like they do in Mexico to make that classic shell pattern, I use a sharp paring knife, slicing just through the top layer of the streusel. I've got the oven preheated to 350 degrees. I'm going to put this in the middle of the oven. It'll take about 25-30 minutes for them to bake. I'll rotate the pan about halfway through. Even in the world of tortas, those classic Mexican sandwiches, we're seeing young chefs reimagine the possibilities of bread. Here at Eno, Enrique Olvera's casual and accessible dining spot, Chef Joaquin Cardoso is making tortas of seared tuna with peas and chipotle mayonnaise and pan-fried chicken milanesa tortas with guacamole. For the tuna torta, he preps the fish by removing the skin. Then he puts a chunk into a pot of oil to slowly cook on the stovetop. After the tuna is done poaching, he spreads both sides of the bread with chipotle mayonnaise and puts peas on the bottom layer. The tuna is sliced, layered over the peas. Then he tops the sandwich with lettuce and puts it into a panini press until the bread is warm and crispy on the outside. The milanesa sandwich starts with a breaded chicken breast that Joaquin fries until it's crispy in a small amount of oil. He slices the bread and spreads the bottom with mayonnaise and the top with guacamole. He cuts the crispy chicken into wide pieces and layers them on top of the mayonnaise. Then the sandwich is topped with a few slices of tomato. The top goes on, and then it's put into the panini press. After it's done toasting, Joaquin opens the sandwich and adds fresh lettuce before he slices it in half and serves it. Crispy, warm, soul-satisfying, these tasty tortas are a seemingly simple homage to perfectly baked bread. I'm here in Xoco. That's our restaurant that focuses on tortas, the fabulous Mexican sandwiches. And I'm going to tell you that my favorite one right now, it might surprise you, is the one that is filled with hongos al mojo de ajo. That would be mushrooms with a kind of roasted garlic bath. And I'm going to show you how to make it because it is so utterly delicious. And it has to start with making a roasted garlic mojo de ajo. We do a very simple one here, and it's easy to do at home. The mojo starts with 4 heads of garlic that have been roasted until they're soft and blackened in places. Once the garlic cools down, peel off that papery husk and then put the garlic into the food processor. Next, measure out 1.5 cups of olive oil. Pulse the garlic in the food processor to get it started chopping. Then pour in the olive oil with the machine still running. Add a teaspoon of salt and 1/4 cup of lime juice. Pulse a couple of times, just to blend it in, to mix it in, and we're ready to move on now to the mushroom part of this. You've got a lot of choices for mushrooms. I like to do it with a mixture of different kinds of mushrooms because I like the flavors and the textures. So I have here cultivated mushrooms, different varieties. Of course, there's the shiitake, which has a very meaty and bold flavor. And then for a complete contrast, oyster mushrooms work really well, and they have a kind of soft and gentle texture. There are times when you can find beautiful wild mushrooms available in nice grocery stores, especially in the fall. Here I have some chanterelles, and this one that's sort of got an orange color to it, that's lobster mushroom, and it's very, very meaty. So I have to cut all of these up, and I'll tell you that when working with shiitake mushrooms, I always pull the stem off of it first. The cap can simply be cut crosswise in about 1/4-inch pieces, but that stem needs to be cut crosswise very thinly because it's very fibrous. Now, the two classic flavors that are used when you're making mushrooms mojo de ajo in Mexico are epazote. If you don't have this, then I would suggest a big handful of chopped cilantro, because you kind of need something herby in this. And then the other thing is that smoky chili, the chipotle in adobo that you find in the can. So I'm going to take a couple of those out and chop those up for us to add to our mushroom filling. Just a few leaves of epazote will be enough to season this whole batch. Now that all the prep is done, I'm going to heat a skillet over medium-high heat. And I'm going to add to it some of the oil, just the oil part of the mojo de ajo. When it gets really hot, I'm going to add those mushrooms all at once and then just toss them continuously until they're beginning to brown. Now, once they've browned, I'm going to reduce the heat under the skillet and then add some of the solids from the mojo de ajo. Then the last two seasonings go in. That would be the smoky chipotle and whatever herb you're using, epazote or cilantro. Now give it a taste and season it generously with salt, because remember, this is a filling that's going to go into your torta. Now, the trick to a really good torta is a really good bollilo or telera bun, one or the other. We have these made for us by an artisan baker here in Chicago. They have a little of that really old-fashioned, slightly sour flavor and a great crust on it, which is what I really like a lot. The first step in making the torta is to cut the bread in half lengthwise. Scoop out a little of the soft interior, the part that's called the miga. Smear the base of the torta with some fresh goat cheese, and then add a generous helping of the mushrooms. Put it all into the oven for the crust to crisp and the inside to get warm. In Xoco, we do that in a wood-burning oven. The final little bit is a little dressed greens. I like to use a wild arugula for it. Just a squeeze of fresh lime juice, a little sprinkling of salt, and then that'll go over the warm filling there. Put that top on there, and then cut our sandwich in half. Little basket, piece of parchment to go in there, just like that. Now, I like this particular torta with a red chili salsa, and I have to say, you take one bite of that mushroom mojo de ajo torta with its goat cheese and arugula, and you're gonna love it just as much as I do.